Okay, welcome. This is Module 6, which will be discussing problems of the environment in this upcoming lectures. So basically, we're going to be talking about our impact on our physical environment. And basically, this starts off with a discussion of technology. The definition of technology is the ability to create and use tools. And what have human beings used tools for? Largely to control the natural environment, right? So even as early as creation of stone implements to cut down trees and hunt animals, to build shelters. We've used technology as a way of controlling our natural environment. And of course, when we do that, and do it increasingly over time on much larger scales, by definition, using technology means that we're consuming natural resources. So whether or not it's cutting down trees to burn or digging up coal out of the ground or using uranium or oil, to fuel our technology, we're extracting and consuming resources from the planet. And then most forms of technology also produce waste. So whether or not that's smoke in the air, or carbon dioxide, or radioactive materials. So all three of those things, we use technology to control our natural environment, to, by definition, consumes resources and produces waste. And our use of technology has now, in both direct and indirect ways, resulted in human beings being the species on the planet which have the possibility of extinguishing all life on the planet. It's not a very popular topic or a thing to say. However, whether or not you're talking about our creation of nuclear weapons, or our use of technology to the point where we are significantly having negative impacts on the planet as a whole. Either one of those things are examples of the fact that technology now gives us the ability to destroy all the life on the planet. Which leads us to, again, what are some of our constructions about technology? Again, if I look at it that way and I say it that way, that sounds very, very harsh and very kind of, wow, eye-opening. But we don't always look at technology that way. Typically, when we think about our social constructions of technology, we think about ourselves as we're very pleased and happy with ourselves for being one of the, definitely the only species on the planet to mass use technology on a huge scale. We regard technology as the solution to all our problems, right? If there's something facing us as a species, we'll use our technology to solve that problem. We'll build something. We'll create a new tool. So we don't often look at, and again, that control over our natural environment. Don't want to come off sounding too much like a druid or a hippie here, but very rarely does our solution to problems involve coexisting with our natural environment. It usually means dominating it somehow. And again, we have this notion that these finite resources which exist on the planet are going to somehow stretch indefinitely. This concept of we're not going to run out of petroleum, we're not going to run out of uranium, we're not going to run out of lithium to make batteries with. We just have this notion of somehow our technology, our use of technology, will continue to extend these resources indefinitely. Or sometimes our goal is we can actually then free ourselves from those use of resources. Somehow technology will get to the point of we won't need oil anymore, which again, you can certainly point to as saying, okay, we do need to pursue that, right? Because we know the oil is going to run out eventually. But we sometimes then say, okay, the solution to that problem is more technology, right? We'll use a different technology to replace that technology. And again, these are the things that have been, through a very hegemonic way, right, instilled in us from a very, very, very early time in our lives. And quite the opposite. Our technology has now made us more dependent on what eventually are is going to be finite resources. Okay? So we sometimes say to ourselves, well, how are we going to solve these things? And what are some of the ways that we're dealing with some of the issues that are now starting to become predominant issues in our society today regarding, our use of technology. Um, and again, what we sometimes run into in the face here is this concept of scientific uncertainty. Okay, not only in social science classes, but I'm sure you've heard in other what we might call the hard sciences. No, no science is perfect, right? This idea of science doesn't explain everything. There's no research which absolutely, without a question of a doubt, answers anything. Right? This idea of uncertainty. And sometimes, unfortunately, what that does is give us this notion that if we can't explain things scientifically to the 100th degree, then we then sometimes overlook things, or that argument can be used against scientific rationale or scientific explanations for what's going on. So we sometimes ask ourselves, especially when we're talking about this impact we're having on the planet, is how serious is the damage being caused by humans, and how long can we continue to go as we are right now? And effects of trying to answer this often run into this idea of we don't precisely know, right? We can't point to the date when oil is going to run out. We can't point to the date when the Earth is going to become too hot. We can't point to the date when our technology outstrips our ability to consume resources. So we sometimes wonder about, again, why are we doing or not doing things about that? Two things that are often pointed out is the amount of impact, right, and the what we sometimes call the regionalization of impact, when we tend to suffer things very quickly, or we realize the impacts of things very quickly or very directly. We as individuals are much more likely to react to it. So the example I sometimes give, if you were living in a small town, let's say you have a piece of property and there's a stream running through your property or borders your property, and you enjoy the stream, you go like going down there and sitting by it and fishing or reading or doing whatever you like to do, swimming in it, cooling off on a hot day. And then one day you walk down and the stream is smells bad and looks terrible, is a different color, and maybe has some gross foam on it, or you find dead fish floating in it. My guess is your reaction would be pretty immediate. And if you were to then investigate and find out that maybe a mile up the stream there's a factory or a warehouse or some type of business, and you see a big pipe and there's gunk running into the stream, my guess is your reaction probably would be, I'm not sure what's causing this problem in my stream, right? Your reaction would probably be, oh my God, that's awful, and you would take action immediately, to deal with that. My guess is would be, well, they're doing good things for the planet, and I'm sure we need the service or the product they're building. Your immediate reaction would be, that's my stream, and I see what's being done to it, and you probably react very quickly, calling the authorities, the police, lobbying to get that company to stop pouring things into that stream, right? The impact is immediate and recognizable, and your action as an individual is probably very swift and direct as well. And we've actually seen instances, not on the individual, owning a stream or having a stream, but we've seen times in our society when we have actually acted relatively quickly and successfully to deal with effects on the environment. In the 1970s, there was a phenomenon which started gaining more and more attention called acid rain. This concept of corrosive chemicals being released in factories and chimneys, being put up into the atmosphere and then mixing basically with the dust that forms a lot of times rain clouds, and then coming back down as basically corrosive acid rain. This concept of people suffering directly from it, cars and houses and public buildings and statues, and even individuals suffering from the debilitating effects of basically having acid dropped on them from the sky. And it was society's reaction was pretty immediate. Science got together and said, okay, here's the composition of these chemicals that are falling on us. This is where they're coming from. And our society, including the government, worked really quickly to say, we have to ban putting these chemicals into the sky. And it was the first real kind of national environmental movement in the United States, but around the world it was occurring too, because as we know, weather is not just condensed to one area of the world, but and certain types of chemicals were immediately banned, and corporations were made to agree with those regulations and comply with them. And we rarely ever hear about the issue of acid rain anymore, whereas one time in the 70s it was a pretty far-fetched. I remember as a youth being, you can't go outside today, there's an acid rain call, full warning. In the 1980s, specifically 1985, there was warning of the ozone layer, which is a layer of our atmosphere, which is made of the gas ozone, which keeps solar radiation from bombarding our planet, was deteriorating. And there were several holes identified, and one specific, a large one, being over the continent of Antarctica, but then started pointing around the globe. There were these holes opening up in the ozone layer, letting in dangerous amounts of solar radiation, which was, basically causing cancers and, all sorts of other issues. And again, science said, okay, the ozone is being negatively affected by what we call chlorofluorocarbons, which are included in a lot of types of, aerosol sprays, but also old style air conditioners use them. And it was quickly identified those are what's causing these problems. And again, very quickly, government and other agencies moved to say, okay, we can't use those chemicals anymore, and those were banned. And if you were to check on the ozone layer today, not to say that it's completely healed, but we don't have those same kind of issues. We're worrying about these enormous, huge holes opening up and frying the people who live underneath the holes. But also a lot of scientific evidence pointed to the idea that the ozone layer has, for the most part, repaired itself by moving. So those two examples prove that sometimes we have the ability to move very quickly on environmental concerns, especially when they seem to be affecting us very directly. Well, of course, we're now faced with this population of global warming and climate change. And again, I hope you all know this, but when we talk about this, it's the accumulation of what we call greenhouse gases. When we burn, especially petroleums, things like that, it causes specific gases to be released in the air, and those collect underneath our atmosphere, causing what we call a greenhouse effect, keeping heat trapped in the planet, as opposed to just being released or being able to cool off on its own, and raising the temperature of the planet. Again, in 1992, the Royal Society of London was the first major group to recognize that this was going on. In 1995, an Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, again confirmed that temperatures were going up and that human activity is causing this. In 2007, the IPCC said warming of the planet is unequivocal, meaning it's happening. This isn't guessing. This isn't panic. In 2009, 300 scientists from 160 research groups in 48 nations basically said warming is unmistakable. In 2014, again, I'm going to look up the exact quote here, the IPCC said, and I quote, "Observed impacts of climate change have already affected agriculture, human health, ecosystems on land and in the oceans, water supplies, and some people's livelihoods." And in 2014, the United Nations reported that 13 of the first 14 years of the 21st century were the warmest on record, that insect-borne diseases were on the rise, and glaciers were calving, meaning they were starting to separate and fall into the ocean, and this was causing the rising of sea levels. Well, if you just summarize all those things, so from 1992 to 2014, approximately 20 years, we've been looking at very specific reports that something is happening on a global scale. One would say, why isn't this like our reactions to acid rain in the ozone layer? And a large part of it has to do, again, back to this concept of scientific uncertainty. this concept that for every person who says this is happening scientifically, another person can say there's no evidence of that, right? Again, skeptics of with these warnings will say that there's no evidence of climate change, that it's not due to human activity, and that there's nothing. If it is happening, there's nothing we can do about it. And again, from a critical constructionist point of view, where are those arguments coming from? Well, it's largely from the people who would need to invest the most amount into making the changes. Scientists definitely say that cutting back in greenhouse gas emissions is the key to doing this. Of course, what does that mean? It requires a lot of investment in technology other than the technology we're using today, so a major shift over in technology, some of which you actually start to hear about today, but largely cutbacks to industrial production, which of course would result in cutbacks to corporate profits. We're going to take more of a look at this in the next lecture.